Hey, this is more of the argument outline. We talked about alternative arguments in the last video. Now I want to talk about the patterns that you can use to write your essay. And it might surprise you. So we've got in the body of the argument a chance for you to use all the rhetorical modes, that's just the type of organizations, in the argument itself, because argument lends itself to most of the things that you've written. You can do an argument that is just exemplification. So I'm just going to give detailed examples. If you think of it in terms of why children should be vaccinated, then you could use simple exemplification. Sorry, I have to find room for my elbow. But just simple explanation of examples you found will definitely work. You can also use comparison and contrast. You can show the similarities of things, the differences of things. Think about if you're writing about two political candidates and you want to compare and contrast, you probably have a preference. So you can use that in your text as well. Cause and effect works really well. Really what you want to do is give evidence if you're doing a cause, and you want to hypothesize if you're doing effects in an argument. So something that I might hypothesize, if I've written about the greenhouse effect, then we don't know how that is going to impact us in the future, but we have evidence now that could lead us to essentially a hypothetic idea that the world is not going to be livable in, I don't know, I heard some data the other day. I think it was like 500 years. But cause and effect definitely works. And yes, you can use narration. What you want to do in a argument essay is you want to keep with examples that aren't just you. And also, you don't want to go through the essay saying things like I think and I believe and I feel, because I know those things if you write it in a sentence. Because if I said I think that children should be vaccinated, it's the same thing if I say children should be vaccinated, because you know it's coming from me if I'm writing it. So don't do that. Now, if you have an example that you can give, if you know someone who won't vaccinate their child, then yes, you can use that narrative example because it's something you've observed. But go easy on it, because when you are writing very formal research essays, you want as little as possible. And the best overall organization, you're going to go from the weakest point to the strongest point. If you start off with the big thing, people will not read the rest of your essay. If you, however, start with maybe the weakest example, the weakest point that you have, and then move to that strongest point, then you're going to have a really good organized argument. So, conclusion, you want to summarize your points. So, the shorter the essay, the less you need to summarize, obviously. So if it's 3 pages long, you don't have to do a lot of summary. If it's 10 pages long, do some summary. And just go back over this point. You don't want to introduce any new information. But what you can do is maybe explain the implications of the argument. So the benefits that people will have if they accept it, and the consequences of rejecting it. So if you, once again, don't vaccinate your child, here is the implication of the consequence. If you do, then there are benefits. So it's just going back over those main points, not expanding on them, but just reminding the reader. Oh, and I put here, don't introduce any new ideas. That's what you should do in the body of your paper. And then I always tell students, leave the reader with a final thought, basically to give them closure. And if you look at novels or if you look at movies, a lot of times what they do is refer back to an earlier point in the example or something that happened, and it works really, really well. If you think about, oh, what's the name of it? Where the Wild Things Are by Sindak. What happens in that children's book is that Max does not want to go and eat his dinner. He wants to play and doesn't want to go to sleep because he wants to play. So he leaves and he finds that wonderful place with all those big fuzzy monsters, and they have a wild rumpus. But then he kind of decides that maybe he should go home. Which he does, and his mother is waiting for him with a hot bowl of soup, I think. But that is coming back, and children's books do that because you want the children to know that if you start and you have an adventure, you can always come back home. And if you think about it in rhetorical writing, if I'm arguing something, give you an example. My father had cancer and was in a room with another man who had the same thing. My dad worked for the state, so he had really great insurance. The other guy who was diagnosed had been laid off from his job for a few months, and then they found the cancer. I might use that in the beginning of my essay. I mean, expand on it a little bit. But my mom and dad kind of, became friends with them because they would see them in the hospital or when they went to get chemo. And what happened ultimately was that because my dad had insurance, he could continue his treatments. The other gentleman didn't. So at some point, he couldn't afford chemo or any other procedure. And he died about a year after treatment. My dad lived for 5 more years. And what I would do if I was talking about, if I'm arguing why people need insurance, then I can talk about them at the beginning or maybe even in the body, and then come back with that final thought of, I had 5 years with my dad, which were a wonderful 5 years. And that other family didn't get to keep their dad. Wow, I almost made myself cry. But that's a great thing to think about, is go back to something you've already talked about and fit that in at the end, obviously, to help prove your point. And ta-da, that's the end. The thing that I want to do now is, if you have watched this entire video, if you've watched all 3, congratulations. But if you've watched this entire video, then I'm going to do something for you. Hang on, I'll be right back. You guys have seen Kermit when he lives in my office. This is a guy from Fraggle Rock. So, if you send a message to me, let's say by Monday of next week, that you saw a character from Fraggle Rock, then you get 10 points, 10 extra credit points. Here's his feet. And if you obviously have any questions about anything in the argument outline, just yell, and I can help you through it. So that's it for argument. Talk to you guys later.